The body surfaced at 0347. It came up slow, the way things always do in the bayou. No drama, no splash. Just a dead man rising through black water like he had changed his mind about staying down. The two men on the stern of the barge saw it and froze. They were professionals. They had seen bodies before. But they had not seen a body with a .308 entry wound so clean it looked like a drill press had made it. And they had not heard the shot. That was the part that broke them. Not the death, the silence. The absolute, unbroken silence of the bayou, going about its business as if nothing had happened. As if a man had not just been removed from the world with surgical precision, from a direction that made no sense, from a position that should not have existed. One of them grabbed his radio. His hands were shaking. "Contact! We have contact! What direction? I cannot determine direction of..." The second shot came before he finished the sentence. 72 hours earlier, the bayou had been quiet. Maya Callahan entered the water at 0412 before the first suggestion of light touched the cypress trees. She did not ease in. She did not hesitate at the cold. She walked straight off the bank like the water owed her something, rifle held across her chest, and she kept walking until only her eyes and the barrel of the Mark 14 were above the surface. Frank Callahan watched from the bank. He was sitting on an overturned aluminum bucket, drinking coffee from a thermos that had seen better decades, wearing the same canvas jacket he had worn since 1987. He did not call out to her. He did not offer encouragement. He watched the way a man watches a thing he built, looking for the flaws only he would know to find. The target was a gallon jug hung from a cypress branch across the water. Distance, 340 meters. The jug was swinging on a thin rope in the pre-dawn breeze, barely moving, but moving. Maya went still. That was the first thing Frank had ever taught her. Before trigger discipline, before ballistics, before anything else. Be still. The water will betray every heartbeat if you let it. Make your body believe it is part of the swamp, and the swamp will carry your bullet for you. She controlled her breathing. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. Her heart rate dropped to 44 beats per minute, a number most combat physicians would not believe if you told them. She had been doing this since she was 12 years old. She had been doing this since her father was alive to watch her. The same way Frank was watching her now, from the same bank, in the same dark. She squeezed the trigger between heartbeats. The jug exploded. Frank looked at the water. He looked at the point where the muzzle had broken the surface. He looked at the tree line on the far bank. He looked at all three the way a man looks at a sum that should add up but doesn't quite. "Windage," he said. "You're still favoring the south wind. Half a click right. You've been doing it for 2 weeks." Maya rose from the water without a word. She walked back to the bank and sat down on a piece of driftwood and began field stripping the rifle with the automatic efficiency of someone who has performed the same action 10,000 times. Water ran off her in sheets. She was 26 years old, and she moved through this pre-dawn ritual the way a much older person moves through a familiar room in the dark. Not thinking about where things are, just knowing. "I hit the target," she said. "You hit the target where the wind put it," Frank said. "That's not the same thing." She looked up at him. She had her mother's face, high cheekbones, a quality of stillness that could read as coldness if you didn't know her. She had her father's eyes. Frank had never told her that. He thought about telling her every time he looked at her, and every time he found a reason not to. "Again," he said. She went back into the water. They went through it 4 more times before the sun came up. Each time Frank found something. The windage, then the trigger pull, then a slight elevation error on the third shot that he attributed to her breathing patterns shifting after 90 minutes in 58-degree water. Each time Maya came back out, made the adjustment, went back in. She did not complain. She did not ask whether the standard was reasonable. In the 12 years she had been training in this bayou, she had learned that the standard was not a negotiation. When they finally drove north in Frank's truck, the rifle case was in the back seat, and 2 paper cups of gas station coffee were going cold in the cup holder. The Louisiana highway stretched flat and pale through sugarcane fields that had not changed in 40 years. Frank drove the way he had driven every road that mattered in his life, like he had already memorized where it ended. Maya had her boots off on the dashboard. She was reading the ops brief Commander Vance had sent to her secure phone at 0600. She read it twice. Then she put the phone face down on her knee and looked out the window at the flat land moving past. "Caspian Star," she said. Frank's jaw moved slightly. Not quite a reaction, something that lived just behind one. "Commercial registry?" he asked. "Panama, flagged through Cyprus, 12-day transit from Odessa." She picked up the phone again. "Naval intelligence has it carrying 40 containers. Classified cargo." The words they're not using in this brief are the interesting ones. What words aren't they using? Chemical, precursor, lethe. The truck was quiet for a long time. A hawk sat on a fence post beside the highway and watched them pass with the complete indifference of a creature that has no stake in human problems. "Frank, I heard you. You know that name." He took a slow drink of coffee. Outside, a great blue heron lifted off a drainage ditch and climbed into the white morning sky with the unhurried confidence of something that has never been threatened by anything it could not outfly. "Project Lethe was buried in 1991, he said. "Someone dug it up." He did not say anything else for 11 miles. The briefing happened at 1400, conducted via secure video link to a JSOC Forward Coordination Office outside New Orleans. Maya drove 40 minutes to reach it. Senior Chief Garrett Holt ran the brief from the front of the room, standing at the map board the way he always stood, shoulders squared, weight forward, like he was prepared to be argued with. He was 42 years old and had the particular stillness of a man who had been shot at enough times that ordinary tension no longer registered on his face. He was good at his job. Maya respected that. She also knew he had never wanted her on his team. He had never said so. He didn't need to. There are ways a man can hand you a coffee mug and communicate an entire philosophy about your right to be in the room. Holt had that skill, and he deployed it without malice, which almost made it worse. The mission was straightforward on paper. Intercept the Caspian Star 30 miles south of the Louisiana coast. Board, secure, seize cargo, extract. Night operation, 6-man element, standard maritime interdiction protocol. The kind of mission SEAL Team 4 had executed 40 times in the past decade without particular drama. Maya was listed as Team Sniper, Element Overwatch. Holt dismissed the team at 1450. He asked Maya to stay. She already knew what was coming. She had known since she saw the name Lethe on her brief, because some names announce themselves before you understand why. Someone at a level well above this room had made a decision, and Holt was the man standing in front of that decision with the unhappy task of delivering it to someone who deserved better. He waited until the room cleared. He did not sit down. He stood by the window with his arms crossed, looking at something outside that required no looking at. "I have to pull you from the element," he said. "On what grounds?" "Profile assessment, pending psychological review." He said it like a man reading a sentence he hadn't written and didn't agree with. "Orders came in at 1100, above my pay grade." "Above your pay grade," she repeated. "Maya, who issued the order, Senior Chief?" He looked at her then, and in his face was something she had not expected from Garrett Holt. Not apology, not the flat, professional indifference he usually wore as armor. Something that looked, briefly and unmistakably, like guilt. The guilt of a man who has followed an order he should have questioned. "Strickland," he said. "Brigadier General Harlan Strickland, Joint Special Operations Command." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she picked up her folder and walked out. She did not slam the door. She closed it with the precise quietness of someone who has learned that controlled exits communicate more than angry ones. She called Frank from the parking lot. "Strickland," she said when he picked up. The silence on the other end lasted exactly long enough for her to understand that the name was not new to him and that the weight of it was not small. "Where are you?" he said. "Coordination office lot. My truck." "Drive to me. Don't take the highway." She got to the house at 2100. Frank had the kitchen table cleared and covered with documents she had never seen. Paper documents, not printouts, not photocopies. Originals. Some of them were brown at the edges with age, the paper gone soft and fibrous, the way important things go when time has had its way with them. Some had classification headers that technically should not have existed in a private residence in rural Louisiana. The kind of documents a man keeps when he has decided that certain truths are too dangerous to trust to any system but himself. Frank set a glass of water in front of her. He remained standing. When Frank Callahan stood to tell you something, it meant he needed the ability to move if the words became too heavy. "Operation Tide Caller," he said. "Kuwait, March 1991, 3 weeks after the ceasefire." He had never told her this story. In 26 years of knowing him, across every conversation on every dark porch, in every pre-dawn range session, in every long drive through Louisiana backroads, he had never spoken this name. The fact that he was speaking it now told her more than the words themselves. "We received a target package," he said. "Single individual, asset described as compromised, working name Petrov. The brief said he was passing intelligence to Soviet contacts. We were told he was preparing to defect." Frank's voice was level, precise. The voice of a man who had rehearsed this telling many times in private and still found it difficult in practice. "We were told he needed to be stopped before he crossed into Jordan." He paused. He looked at the documents rather than at her, which was the only way he could continue. "I was the shooter, 1100 meters, clean shot. I never saw the man's face through the scope. I didn't need to. The scope doesn't require you to know who you're looking at, only where." He turned a document toward her. His name was Alexei Petrov. He was a CIA officer. He was American. He was not defecting. Maya looked at the document, the name, the photograph of a man in his 40s with a serious face and eyes that looked like they had seen through a number of comfortable illusions. The original kill order with a signature at the bottom that she did not yet recognize. "He had discovered Project Lethe," Frank said, "a CIA program running since 1988. They were manufacturing chemical weapons off the books, outside the treaty framework, outside congressional oversight, outside every legal and moral boundary that was supposed to make the United States government different from the people it opposed. The stated intent was to create a stockpile that could be deployed and attributed to Iraqi forces if the Gulf War required a justification for escalation." He sat down now, slowly, the way old injuries insist on announcing themselves. "The war ended too quickly, faster than anyone in the program had planned for. The stockpile couldn't be destroyed fast enough without creating a record of what was being destroyed. So they moved it, warehoused it through third-party channels, and then they buried the program and everyone who had touched it and called it history. And Petrov was going to expose it," Maya said. "Petrov was going to give every document to the Senate Intelligence Committee. He had a contact on the committee staff. He had a meeting scheduled for April 3rd, 1991. Frank's finger moved to the signature at the bottom of the kill order. The movement was deliberate. He had been waiting to make it for a long time. Harlan Strickland was a colonel in 1991. He signed Petrov's termination order personally. He told us Petrov was a traitor. He did not tell us Petrov was one of ours." Maya sat with that for a moment. The kitchen clock moved. Somewhere outside, something moved through the water at the edge of the property, and the night absorbed the sound. "Petrov had a son," she said, "Viktor Sorokin, born 1961. His mother was Russian, never naturalized. The boy went back to Moscow when Petrov was killed. He was 30 years old, already GRU, already someone who understood how the world actually operated beneath its official surface. And when the Soviet Union collapsed and the GRU men found themselves in a world that no longer had institutional use for them, Sorokin built a business in private arms acquisition. Frank placed a second document on the table. He has been tracking the Lethe stockpile for 11 years. This shipment is not his first attempt. Each previous attempt was stopped not by law enforcement, but by people moving the cargo before he could reach it. Maya was quiet. She was looking at the signature on the kill order. "He pulls me from the element," she said, "because he knows you would brief me if I was in the area. And he knows that if you briefed me, I'd come." "He's trying to contain this," Frank said, "the same way he's always contained it. By controlling who's in the room when the important decisions are made." She looked up. "What does Sorokin actually want with 40 containers of chemical weapons, Frank?" "Because a man who grew up in the intelligence world knows those containers are a liability, not an asset." Frank was quiet for a moment. Outside, the bayou moved with its ancient, patient indifference. "Not what they think," he said. They left before midnight. Frank loaded the truck with the efficiency of a man who had spent 40 years ensuring he was never surprised by his own unpreparedness. The rifle cases, the dry bags, the waterproof document envelope he had kept in the floor safe for 28 years, specifically against the possibility of exactly this night. The night when the buried thing finally came back up and someone needed to be ready for it. Maya loaded her own gear in silence. The Mark 14 enhanced battle rifle with M118LR ammunition, not the Barrett, which was too heavy for extended water operations. The Sig Sauer P226 on her hip, the one Frank had given her on her 18th birthday, with the instruction that it was a tool, not a symbol, and should be treated accordingly. The custom diving rig Frank had designed and built for her when she was 16, assembled from components sourced across 4 states over 2 winters, not military issue and not commercially available. A piece of equipment that existed nowhere in any catalog because the need it addressed was not supposed to exist. She stood at the truck for a moment before she got in. "Tell me the rest," she said, "about my father." Frank's hand rested on the truck roof. He did not look at her. The insects were loud in the dark. The bayou breathed around them with its steady, vegetable patience. "When we're on the water," he said. She got in. The bayou swallowed the truck's taillights within 30 seconds, and then the road was empty and dark, and the only sound was the slow movement of black water through the cypress roots, working its way south the way it had been working its way south for 10,000 years, carrying everything the land gave it without complaint or preference. Somewhere out on the Gulf, the Caspian Star was running dark, 30 miles south and closing. The water moves in long, slow respirations that have nothing to do with wind, and the sound it makes against a rubber hull is the sound of something patient waiting for something careless to come close enough. Senior Chief Garrett Holt had crossed water like this 41 times in his career. He had stopped counting the feeling a long time ago. What remained was not feeling, but process. Check your gear. Check your man's gear. Check it again. Move. The process was reliable in the way that feelings never quite managed to be. The combat rubber raiding craft ran without lights at 4 knots. The engine throttled down to a sound below the threshold of attention. 5 men, Holt at the stern, Leland Doss on the port bag with the gear bag across his knees, head down, quiet in the way he had been quiet since they launched from the staging point. A quietness that Holt had noted without yet understanding. Wade Greer, 2 seats back, jaw set, running his thumb along the safety of his HK-416 in the unconscious way he always did in the minutes before a boarding. The same gesture he had made before every operation Holt had watched him go into. A man's body remembering its own habits. 2 more operators behind him, watching the dark with the trained patience of people who have learned that what you miss in the first 30 seconds of observation is usually what kills you. The Caspian Star was a silhouette at first. Then it was a wall. 160 meters of commercial cargo ships sitting dead in the water, running lights dim, presenting the profile a vessel shows when it has been instructed to look unremarkable. The name was painted in faded white on the stern, the letters salt-bleached and peeling at the edges, the way painted letters do when the sea has been working on them for years. Nothing about it suggested 40 containers of weapons capable of ending a city. That was, of course, exactly the point. Holt keyed his radio. One click, the team went to work. They came up the port side on magnetic clamps, smooth and practiced. Greer first, then Holt, then the others, rolling over the rail in sequence and going flat on the deck in the shadow of a container stack with the coordinated economy of men who have rehearsed this particular sequence until it lives below conscious thought. The ship smelled of diesel and rust and salt and the particular staleness of enclosed metal spaces. The crew quarters amidships showed one light in a porthole. One light. For a crew of 18 men. Something was wrong. Holt raised his fist. The element froze. He listened. The ship moved under him in the slow Gulf swell. A long, gentle rocking that would have been almost pleasant under different circumstances. Somewhere forward, metal ticked against metal in the thermal contraction of the cooling night. He heard no voices, no movement between berthing spaces, no sound consistent with 18 men on a working vessel at anchor in open water. He signaled Doss forward to the first container. Doss moved low and fast, pulled the bolt handle on the lock, swung the heavy door. Empty. Not empty the way a container looks when cargo has been offloaded. Empty the way a container looks that has never held anything. Clean floor, no tie-down marks, no residue of weight or use. Holt moved to the next one himself. Same result. He signaled across the stack. Greer checked 2 more on the starboard row, moving quickly and quietly, the beam of his weapon light cutting into each container and finding nothing. Empty. Empty. 40 containers, all of them empty. Holt's chest did something it had not done in years. It tightened in the specific way it tightens when a man of long experience understands that he has walked into a situation that was designed for him to walk into. He was reaching for his radio when Doss spoke. Not in a whisper, out loud, with a flat effect, the way a man speaks when he has already accepted a situation he helped create and has moved beyond the phase where concealment serves any purpose. Senior Chief, Holt turned. Doss was standing in the open, both hands at his sides, visible, not holding his weapon. The gear bag was open at his feet. Inside it, where the breaching kit should have been, was a transmitter the size of a paperback novel, its indicator light blinking green in the dark, with the calm regularity of a device doing exactly what it was built to do. Holt understood immediately. The understanding arrived not as surprise, but as a physical sensation. A cold pressure behind the sternum. The specific and deeply unpleasant feeling of a man who has operated at a high level for 20 years, suddenly comprehending how cleanly and completely he has been used. How long, Holt said. Not a question, a ledger being opened. 6 months, Doss said. The transmitter has been active since we boarded. But the location data started transmitting at 1600 this afternoon when I confirmed the launch window. Doss's voice was controlled and effectless. He was 28 years old and he was explaining his betrayal with the detached precision of a man filing an administrative report. He told me no one would be killed. He said it was intercept and detain only. Who said that, petty officer? Sorokin. Holt looked at Doss for a long moment. He thought about every briefing this man had sat in over the past 6 months, every grid coordinate he had heard spoken aloud, every conversation in every ready room, and every staging area where operational details had been discussed freely because the people in the room were trusted. He thought about what that accumulated information was worth to someone building toward a specific outcome, and what it had cost everyone else. Then the first RPG round hit the water 15 meters off the starboard bow, and the thinking stopped, and the work began. 4 boats came out of the north simultaneously, fast movers, low profiles, running dark the same way the SEAL team had run dark, because someone had written the playbook and sold it. The team scattered across the deck, using container stacks for cover, the night coming apart in muzzle flash and the hard, flat percussion of automatic weapons fire that has a completely different quality when it is aimed at you than when it is not. Greer pulled Doss behind a container by the collar, not gently. Holt was already moving, calling positions over the radio, working the angles, doing the calculations that 20 years of combat experience perform automatically, even when the conscious mind is occupied with staying alive. Then Holt's second radio, the personal one, encrypted, not on the team net, vibrated once in his vest pocket. A text from a number he recognized immediately. A DIA analyst he had worked with in 2015. A careful, methodical man who did not make contact without a reason that justified the risk. 4 words. Strickland made a deal. Holt read it twice in the middle of an active firefight. Then the full shape of what he was standing in the middle of assembled itself in his mind with the cold clarity of a thing that has been true for some time, finally becoming visible. Strickland had reached out to Sorokin 6 weeks ago through back channels that left no official record. The arrangement was straightforward in the way that corrupt arrangements often are. Let Sorokin take the weapons. Let him move them to a location of his choosing where they would be quietly and permanently eliminated. In exchange, Sorokin would ensure that the Lethe documentation, the records that Sorokin had spent 11 years assembling, the records that could end Strickland's career and his freedom, would never reach a journalist, a congressional staffer, or a court. Both men wanted the same outcome, the evidence destroyed, the past staying buried, the version of events that had survived 30 years continuing to survive. Vance had discovered the arrangement 3 days ago. She had reported it upward through proper channels. Upward had told her to manage the situation quietly, to maintain operational cover while the arrangement was allowed to proceed under controlled conditions. Sending 6 men onto an empty ship in the Gulf of Mexico was apparently what controlled and quiet looked like when the people making decisions had something to protect. Holt put the radio back in his pocket. The fight lasted 11 minutes on the deck of the Caspian Star. 11 minutes is a very long time when trained men are trying to kill you in an enclosed space with limited cover and no extraction route. And the extraction route that was supposed to exist has not materialized. Holt took a round through the left forearm, a clean through and through that he noted clinically and set aside as a problem for later. 2 operators on the starboard side pushed their attackers back to the rail through disciplined fire and movement. The boats circled and probed without committing to a full boarding, which told Holt they were not trying to take the ship. They were trying to hold the team in place while something else happened somewhere else. A helicopter came from the south, black, unmarked, running a searchlight that swept the deck in slow, methodical passes. Military-grade optics on a platform with no registration. The kind of equipment that does not appear in the inventories of commercial security contractors. Holt got Commander Vance on the SATCOM. He gave her a 10-second sit rep in the flat, precise language of a man who has learned to communicate essential information under conditions that do not favor extended conversation. 40 containers empty. Active transmitter confirmed. Team under fire. Requesting extraction guidance and actual cargo location. Vance's response took 8 seconds. In operational communication, 8 seconds is not a pause. It is a statement. Hold your position, she said. Extraction is 20 minutes out. The cargo is not on this vessel, Commander. This is a diversion. Where is the actual shipment? Another pause. Shorter this time, but no less meaningful. That information is being assessed at this time. Holt recognized the language with the immediate recognition of a man who has used it himself. He had deployed those exact words twice in his career, both times when he was managing a situation he was not authorized to explain to the person asking. Vance knew exactly where the cargo was. She had known before the brief. She had sent 6 men onto an empty ship in the Gulf of Mexico in full knowledge of what they would find and what would be waiting for them when they found it. He looked at Greer. Greer looked back at him with the expression of a man who has arrived at the same conclusion by a slightly different route and is no more pleased about it for the independent confirmation. Doss was sitting against the container with his wrists zip-tied, looking at the deck with the expression of someone who had expected this to go differently. "Wade," Holt said. "Port ladder. We're getting in the water." They went over the side in sequence, Wounded first, then Doss under restraint, then the remaining operators, Holt last, as he always was. The Gulf took them, and they swam south, away from the boats and the helicopter and the searchlight, Holt pulling Doss through the black water by his tied wrists, not thinking about the 11 minutes or the 8-second pause or any of the larger architecture of betrayal that had put them here. Just the compass on his wrist. Just the bearing south. Just the faint lightening of the horizon that confirmed direction. They were 40 meters from the hull when Wade Greer stopped swimming. Holt turned. Greer was face down in the water. There had been no audible shot, no warning, no splash. Just a man swimming and then a man not swimming, and the water around him changing color in a way that had nothing to do with the darkness of the night. Holt reached him in 4 strokes. He turned him over. He looked at him for a moment in the water, the Gulf moving both of them together in its long, slow, indifferent swell. Then he let go, because there was nothing else to do, because holding on would not change what had already become permanent, because there were 4 other men still alive whose continued living required him to keep moving. He let go. He kept moving. He did not speak again until they reached the emergency life raft cached 2 miles south of the vessel, the one that existed in no official mission packet, that Holt had placed there himself 3 days earlier, because 20 years of experience had taught him that the extractions that aren't on the plan are the ones that save lives. In the bayou, Maya had heard all of it. She had been in the water for 4 hours by then, settled into the soft mud bottom of the Atchafalaya Basin at the point where the channel narrows before the turn toward Bayou Grosse Tete. The water temperature was 58 degrees. Her body had long since stopped registering the cold as discomfort and reclassified it, the way trained bodies learn to reclassify unpleasant information as data. She monitored the team's radio frequency through a waterproof earpiece, following the progression of Holt's controlled voice through the boarding and then the firefight, and then the silence that followed Greer's name going unanswered on the net. She closed her eyes in the water. She gave herself 10 seconds. It was a discipline Frank had taught her, not the suppression of grief, which doesn't work and creates problems downstream, but its temporary containment. 10 seconds. Then you put it somewhere it won't interfere with what needs doing, and you retrieve it later when there is time to carry it properly. She opened her eyes. Frank was on the bank above her, 64 years old and perfectly still in the dark, watching the channel with the patience of a man who has spent a lifetime learning that most things worth watching reveal themselves to people willing to wait. He had a topographic map folded to the relevant section and a handheld GPS unit he had purchased in 2003 and trusted above any device manufactured after it, on the grounds that simplicity is a form of reliability. "They've confirmed Greer," he said quietly. He had been monitoring a second frequency. "Vance's people flagged it. KIA." Maya said nothing. She already knew. "The real shipment has been moving since 1600, Frank said. They launched the Caspian Star as the diversion, while the cargo transferred to a river barge somewhere north of Morgan City. Given the current speed and a 6-hour head start, that barge is coming through this channel." He tapped the map at a specific point with one finger. "Here, estimated transit window, 90 minutes to 3 hours. How many men on the barge?" Sorokin doesn't travel light when the cargo matters. 12 minimum, probably 14. He paused. And Sorokin will be on the barge himself. He has not delegated an endgame in 11 years of working toward this. Maya adjusted the angle of the Mark 14 against the surface tension of the water. The custom rig Frank had built kept the action dry, while the barrel registered no thermal signature above the waterline. In 17 years of testing this equipment in this bayou, under every condition Frank could contrive to test it under, no one standing on either bank had ever successfully identified a shooter's position. "Tell me about my father," she said. Frank was quiet for a long moment. An owl moved through the cypress canopy above them, soundless and purposeful, a thing that belonged to the dark. "Your father was in Kunar province," Frank said. "October 2007. His team was running route reconnaissance near the Korengal Valley. 3 days into a 6-day patrol. He did not look at the map or at the water. He was reciting something he had been carrying for a long time and had rehearsed in private so many times that it had worn grooves. The grid coordinates of his patrol position were leaked, not to the Taliban directly, through a chain of intermediaries that took me 4 years to trace after the fact. The original source of the disclosure was a JSOC administrative office. The leak was authorized by a flag officer with routing access to the operational database. Maya kept her eyes on the channel. "Strickland," she said. "At that point, your father had been submitting intelligence reports for 8 months about a chemical weapons cache his team had recovered in Zabul province. Older material, pre-Soviet-era markings on the external containers. But the compound chemistry inside was American manufactured. He submitted 3 separate formal reports through proper channels." Frank's voice remained level. That was the worst part of it, the levelness. The way a man sounds when he has processed a terrible thing so many times that it no longer has the power to break his voice, only to flatten it. All 3 reports were quietly archived without review or response. He interpreted the silence as bureaucratic delay. He was a straightforward man who believed in institutions. He had a meeting scheduled with a Senate Armed Services Committee staffer through back channels. The meeting was set for November 14th, 2007. The channel moved in the dark. A bird called somewhere deep in the cypress. Maya did not move. "His position was leaked on October 23rd, Frank said. He never knew why. He never knew about Tidecaller or Lethe or any of it. He found a cache. He asked the right questions through the right channels. And the questions led somewhere that someone with 30 years invested in the answer could not permit them to lead." He stopped. "I've known this since 2011. I traced it in 2011. I should have told you then. I told myself I was protecting you. That was not the truth. I was protecting myself from having to say it out loud." "Yes," Maya said. "You should have told me." The word landed without anger, which was, in its way, harder than anger would have been. Somewhere north of them, on the black water of the Atchafalaya, a river barge was moving south through the dark, carrying 40 containers of a program that should never have existed, toward a convergence that several powerful people had spent considerable effort trying to prevent. Maya filed everything Frank had told her. She placed it where it needed to go, not suppressed, not ignored, but stored with the precision of someone who knows that grief carried in the wrong place at the wrong time becomes a weight that kills you, and carried in the right place becomes something else entirely. She focused on the channel. On the far bank, something moved through the shallows, low, deliberate, unhurried. A predator that had chosen its position long before the prey arrived, that had made itself part of the landscape it was hunting from. Maya had been doing the same thing for 4 hours. She understood the logic with the complete understanding of a shared vocabulary. She watched the channel. She waited. The barge came around the channel bend at 0231. It moved the way large things move in narrow water, slowly, with the particular confidence of something that knows the channel has no option but to accommodate it. No running lights. Engine at idle. The crew had done this before, or had been trained extensively by someone who had, and the difference between those two things is impossible to observe from the outside. The quality of their silence was professional. Maya heard it before she saw it. A low displacement pressure moving through the water against her chest. A subtle change in the current. The bayou communicating in the only language it uses. Not words, but physics. The thousand small adjustments a body makes when something large and purposeful enters its space. She did not move. The barge resolved out of the darkness in stages. First a shape darker than the dark of the tree line, then edges, then the angular geometry of stacked containers, then the figures on the deck, 4 visible on the port side alone, moving in the practiced patterns of men on watch who have been told they are safe because no one knows this route. Frank's voice came through the earpiece, barely above the threshold of sound. 7 on the port rail from my position, 4 more on the elevated stern platform, 11 visible, assume 3 below with the cargo. Sorokin will be bow or wheelhouse. Maya's thumb moved to the safety selector. She did not disengage it yet. Holt, she said quietly into the mic. A pause. Then Holt's voice, rougher than his operational baseline, carrying the specific tightness of a man managing pain he has decided not to mention. 2 clicks north, moving with 2 operators, 6 minutes. 6 minutes was significant. 6 minutes was the difference between support and solo. Hold your position, Senior Chief. Callahan, I need 6 minutes. Hold. The silence on the other end had a quality to it. The quality of a man updating a significant number of prior assessments about another person in real time. When Holt spoke again, it was with a different register than he had ever used with her. 6 minutes, he said. Then we're coming, regardless of status. She removed the earpiece and let it settle into the mud beside her. The barge was 280 meters out, and the current was pushing it at roughly 2 knots over ground, which gave her a working window before the channel geometry opened up and she lost her angles. She ran the engagement sequence in the architecture of her mind, where tactical decisions live, below language and above instinct. Priority targets. The man on the elevated stern platform with the RPG across his knees. He dies first in every version of this. Any version in which he does not die first ends badly. The man on the port bow, elevated position, maximum observation arc. He dies second. The 2 men midships on the port rail who have placed themselves close together, which is a discipline failure that she will use. She began her breathing cycle. 4 in, 4 out. The same rhythm she had been running since she was 12 years old. In this same water, taught by the same man sitting on the bank above her. The water temperature had dropped another degree in the preceding hour. She noted this and set it aside. Her core temperature was maintained. Her hands were warm. The trigger was exactly where it had always been. The barge came to 260 meters. She thought about Wade Greer face down in the Gulf, with the water going dark around him. She thought about her father walking into Kunar province in October of 2007, with his patrol grid already in the hands of people who wanted him dead. She thought about Frank sitting on his aluminum bucket in the pre-dawn dark, watching her miss the windage correction by half a click for 2 weeks running, never losing patience, never adjusting his standard downward to make either of them feel better about imprecision. She thought about none of these things. She was still. At 240 meters, she engaged the first target. The man on the stern platform with the RPG dropped without a sound that carried across the water. The suppressor on the Mark 14 reduced the report to something the bayou absorbed as background, a sound below the threshold that wakes sleeping birds. Somewhere nearby, a frog did not stop calling. The predator on the far bank did not move. She shifted. The man on the port bow was turning, not reacting to a sound but to an absence, the specific silence that occupies the space where a man was standing a moment ago. He was mid-turn when the second round found him. The 2 midshipsmen broke apart. That was the correct tactical response, and she had planned for it. She took the left man first because he was moving toward available cover, then adjusted immediately for the right man, who had stopped moving for approximately 2 seconds, which is the duration of human cognitive processing when the brain receives information that contradicts all of its current operational assumptions about safety and direction of threat. 4 shots, 4 men removed from the equation. Elapsed time from first trigger pull, 11 seconds. Then the barge erupted. Not fire, motion and noise in the particular controlled chaos of trained men responding to contact whose source they cannot locate. Men coming up from below decks, shouts layering over each other in Russian and in English, and in one language she could not identify. Weapon lights sweeping the water in rapid arcs that found nothing because there was nothing on the surface to find. Muzzle flash from the bow. 2 more from the starboard side, directed at the tree line on the opposite bank, because the bank is where a shooter is supposed to be. That is where every shooter in the history of riverine operations has been. It is where the geometry of the situation insists they must be. Maya did not move. She was 6 inches below the surface of the Atchafalaya, the barrel of her rifle barely breaking the plane of the water, invisible in the dark, part of the channel in every way that mattered, and the men on the barge were firing at shadows on solid ground, while she lay in the mud and breathed and waited and watched them illuminate themselves with their own weapon lights. Weapon lights in the dark are intelligence. They tell you exactly where a man is, exactly what direction he is facing, and most importantly, they tell you that he is looking at the place where the light is pointed and not at the water 4 feet below his line of sight. 3 more shots, 2 more men down, and one man's weapon light dropped and spun across the deck and came to rest pointing at the sky, which is a direction nothing on this barge needs illuminating. 7 down. Frank's count had put 4 more on deck and 3 below with the cargo. The barge had drifted during the engagement, the wheelhouse operator having made the correct professional decision to put distance between himself and whatever was happening on his deck. The vessel was broadside to the channel now, the current pushing it toward the eastern bank, which changed the angles available to the remaining deckmen. She rose from the water, not with drama, not with announcement. She simply stood up from the bayou the way a feature of the terrain becomes visible when conditions change. Water running off her in sheets in the dark, the Mark 14 already shouldered, already moving to the next decision point. The man on the midship deck saw her first. He had been scanning the bank with his weapon light, and he turned and there was something rising from the channel that his brain did not immediately classify correctly, because the classification requires a category that his experience had not prepared him for. And in the 2 seconds his brain needed to complete the process, she had already finished hers. He sat down hard against the container behind him and did not get up. The remaining 2 deckmen were screened by container stacks on the starboard side. She could hear them moving, could hear the pattern of their movement shift as they processed what the man on the midship deck had apparently encountered, which meant they now understood that the contact was coming from the water and not the bank. She had lost the geographical confusion advantage. She moved left, used the current to carry her parallel to the hull, came up hard against the barge's side, and went over the rail cleanly. Close quarters combat on a river barge does not follow building geometry. The spaces are wrong in ways that require recalibration, narrower in certain axes and more open in others than trained instinct predicts. The deck moving beneath your feet in the subtle, constant motion of a vessel in current, the geometry continuously altered by container placement and deck equipment and the specific locations of things that were not on any diagram she had studied. Frank had anticipated this. When she was 19, he had built a mock barge deck layout in the field behind the house and run her through it under every light condition for 6 months until the geometry was in her body rather than in her head, where it could be confused by stress. She cleared the port side in under 2 minutes. The 2 starboard men came around the forward container stack together. That was their second significant discipline failure of the engagement. She addressed them in sequence with the efficiency that is the only honest product of 10,000 hours of practice. The space between the two shots no longer than the space between one breath and the next. The deck was quiet. 11 men accounted for, 3 more below with the cargo. She found the cargo hatch amidships and descended. The hold was cooled and smelled of metal and preservative compound, and the distinctive dry quality of sealed containers that have been maintained at controlled temperature. Emergency lighting ran in orange bands along the ceiling, casting everything in the color of old photographs. The containers were numbered and stacked in 2 tiers, real containers this time, not the hollow decoys on the Caspian Star, but sealed units with biometric locking mechanisms that confirmed without question that the cargo was exactly what 28 years of buried documentation said it was. 2 men came out from behind the forward container stack with the coordinated movement of people who had been waiting and had a plan for what they were waiting for. She took the first with the rifle in the moment before his plan could execute, and the second with the SIG P226 in the weapon transition that her hands performed without instruction from any conscious process, muscle memory operating on a timeline that thought cannot reach. The third man was not in front of her. She knew he was there before she heard him, before she saw him, from the change in the temperature and pressure of the air against the back of her neck. The specific change that a warm body in motion creates when it moves into the space immediately behind you in a confined area. She dropped and rolled left. His shot went through the space she had just vacated and struck a container with a sound like a large bell being struck once, the tone hanging in the enclosed space for a moment after the echo of the gunshot had faded. She came up from the roll and fired once. The hold was silent. She stood in the orange light and breathed and ran a quick self-assessment. No hits. The cold of the bayou was leaving her body, replaced by the specific physiological warmth that follows the expenditure of trained violence, a warmth that has nothing comfortable about it. She holstered the SIG and went back to the ladder. Sorokin was on the bow. He was standing at the forward rail when she came around the last container stack, looking north up the channel in the direction the barge had come from. The way a man looks at a distance he has traveled when he is not sure he will be traveling back. He was 58 years old and built with the maintained fitness of someone for whom physical capability has always been a professional requirement rather than a personal preference. Gray at the temples, a face that had been something other than what it was now, 20 years ago, and had exchanged that for something more serviceable. His hands were at his sides, open, visible, the deliberate posture of a man who is communicating an intention without words because words at this range and in this situation would take too long to be trusted. He was not holding a weapon. Maya kept the Mark 14 trained on him and closed the distance to 10 meters. The bayou moved around the barge. The cypress trees on both banks stood black against a sky that had begun losing its deepest darkness at the edges. The first imperceptible advance of something that was not yet light. "You're Maya Callahan," he said. His English was completely unaccented, the product of 30 years of practice or a particular kind of ear. "Frank's granddaughter. Step away from the rail. I knew you would come. I told my men there was a shooter in the water. I told them before we entered the channel." A brief pause. "None of them believed me. I suppose I understand why. The idea requires accepting something that falls outside normal operational parameters. Step away from the rail and put your hands on the container behind you." He did not move immediately. He looked at her with the specific expression of a man who has been waiting for a particular conversation for a very long time and has no intention of being moved through its opening at someone else's pace. "Your grandfather killed my father," he said. "You know this." "I know it. Then you have some understanding of why I am standing on this barge, in this channel, at this hour. I understand that you have 40 containers of chemical weapons. I intend for them to be destroyed," Sorokin said. I have intended this for 11 years. Every time I have located this stockpile, it has been moved before I could act. By CIA logistics, by Strickland's network, by people who have spent 30 years ensuring that the physical evidence of Project Lethe never becomes accessible to anyone with the authority to act on it. Because the weapons are not merely weapons, they are the proof. He looked at her with a directness that had nothing aggressive about it. I am not a weapons dealer, Lieutenant. I am a man who understands how leverage operates in the world. And I have understood since I was 30 years old that you cannot force an acknowledgement from a position in which you hold nothing. Maya's finger rested against the trigger guard. Against it, not on it. You've been acquiring them to force a reckoning, she said. To force an acknowledgement of what was done and what it cost. He reached into his jacket with two fingers, slowly, the deliberateness of the movement communicating its own message. He produced a USB drive and held it where she could see it. This contains the complete documentation of Project Lethe from its inception in 1988 through the present. Every authorization signature, every transfer manifest, every internal communication that references the program across 31 years. He paused, including the communication from October 2007, in which Harlan Strickland authorized the operational disclosure of your father's patrol position in Kunar Province. The bayou held them both in its dark patience. My father's name, Maya said, Captain Owen Callahan, 3rd Special Forces Group, 7th Special Forces Group attachment at time of death. Sorokin lowered the drive but kept it visible between them. He found the Zabo cache and reported it correctly through proper channels because he was, by every account I was able to locate across years of research, a man who did things correctly because he believed in the institutions he served. Those reports reached Strickland, who understood that a Special Forces captain asking precise and documented questions in the right province represented an existential threat to 30 years of careful management. He looked at her steadily. Strickland did not order your father killed. He ensured that people who wanted your father dead had the precise information necessary to accomplish that objective. He considers that distinction morally significant. I do not. Maya stood on the bow of the barge in the dark of the Louisiana bayou and felt the full, specific weight of what it means to have carried a suspicion for a long time, and then to have it confirmed in particular and irreversible detail by a source with no reason to lie. Her hands were completely steady. That was the training. That was 12 years in this water, 4 hours in this water tonight, 10,000 hours of building a body that does not betray the mind, even when the mind is receiving information that would justify betrayal. What do you want? She said. The same thing my father wanted in 1991 and died for wanting. I want these documents published in a venue that cannot be suppressed. I want Harlan Strickland indicted. I want a Senate investigation into Project Lethe that proceeds to conclusion rather than being archived at the first point of institutional inconvenience. He set the USB drive on the top of the container beside him. The weapons go to the OPCW for verified destruction. I have been in contact with their technical secretariat for 4 months. The transfer arrangements are complete. The coordinates and chain of custody documentation are on the drive. I give you the drive. I accept whatever legal consequence follows for my own actions in acquiring the cargo. And in exchange, the truth about what was done and who authorized it becomes a matter of permanent public record that no one has the power to manage away. From the north, faint but measurably closer than 6 minutes ago, she heard the sound of boots moving fast through wet ground. Holt. Coming in. In her ear, she had retrieved the earpiece when she boarded. Commander Vance's voice came through with the flat command authority of someone managing a situation from a distance that insulates them from its consequences. Callahan, we have visual on your position. Neutralize the target and secure the cargo for transfer. That is a direct order. Maya looked at Sorokin. He looked back at her without the expression of a man who expects to be neutralized. He had the expression of a man who has spent a very long time calculating a specific moment and has arrived at a genuine acceptance of its range of possible outcomes. "She will manage this the way it has always been managed," he said quietly, "not from malice. Institutional habit is more powerful than malice because it requires no individual decision. The system's first and overwhelming response to exposure is containment. The people inside it have long since stopped distinguishing between protecting the institution and protecting what the institution was built to serve." Vance again, sharper. "Callahan, confirm receipt of order." Maya took 3 steps to the container. She picked up the USB drive. She put it in the zippered chest pocket of her rig and pressed the seal closed. "Victor Sorokin," she said, "you are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." She unclipped a flex cuff from her belt. "Turn around." He turned around without hesitation. He placed his hands behind his back with the deliberateness of a man who has prepared himself for this specific moment across a great deal of time and has made his peace with it. "The drive," Vance said, her voice carrying the particular tension of a person watching a situation move outside the boundaries of their control. "Callahan, confirm you have the drive and confirm its security." "Drive is secured," Maya said. "Cargo hold is clear. Target is in custody. I need a JAG officer and a federal marshal on site before any asset transfer occurs or any detainee is moved." She paused for exactly long enough to make the pause deliberate. "And I need a formal, written explanation for why a JSOC Brigadier General appeared as a direct contact in your personal communications record at 1100 hours yesterday. Because that question will be asked under oath in a formal proceeding, Commander. It would be in everyone's interest for your answer to already be prepared." The silence from Vance lasted exactly long enough to be informative. Holt came over the stern rail with 2 operators moving behind him. He came forward along the deck with the focused efficiency of a man who has been in the water and on foot for the past 2 hours with a through-and-through wound in his forearm and has set all of that aside as secondary to the task. He took in the scene in the way experienced operators take in scenes, rapidly, completely, updating his operational picture without breaking stride. He stopped 6 feet from Maya and looked at Sorokin and then at her. "Cargo status," he said. 40 containers confirmed lithium material in the hold. 3 below confirmed KIA. Drive is in my possession and secured." Holt looked at the deck for a moment. His field dressing had soaked through entirely, and he had not mentioned it once. "Strickland left his residence in Baton Rouge in a private vehicle convoy 38 minutes ago," he said. 3 personal security contractors. He has a monitoring capability on Vance's communications. We can assume he picked up the order to neutralize and understood what it meant when it wasn't executed. He met her eyes directly, the way he had not done in the months she had been on his team. "He's heading for the private aviation terminal at Homa. Estimated wheels up in 45 minutes. Maya handed Sorokin to one of the operators without a word. She went over the rail and into the water. She came up moving, the current carrying her south toward the bank where Frank had positioned the truck. She ran the arithmetic as she swam. Homa was 31 road miles. The Bayou Highway from the barge's current position to the I-10 interchange was 7 miles of single-lane elevated roadway with no viable alternative routing. Strickland had nearly 40 minutes on her and 3 professional contractors in the vehicle. She reached the bank and Frank was there with the truck running, standing beside the driver's door, watching her come out of the water with the expression of a man who has been waiting for exactly this and has the engine warm. She got in the passenger side. He did not ask. He drove. The truck moved through the bayou dark at a velocity inconsistent with the road's posted limitations. Frank's hands easy on the wheel, the headlights cutting pale channels through the hanging Spanish moss. He had been driving this road since before she was born, had driven it in the dark more times than in daylight. He drove it now the way he had driven every road that mattered in his life, like he had already memorized where it ended. "You didn't take the shot," he said. "No. How does it sit?" She looked out the window. The bayou moved past in the dark, black and indifferent and permanent. "Ask me when it's finished," she said. They caught the convoy on the elevated causeway section, 12 miles north of Homa. The contractor SUV appeared ahead as a pair of taillights, moving fast through the empty pre-dawn highway. No other traffic at this hour, the causeway running straight above black water on both sides. Frank closed the distance without instruction. He had spent 40 years closing distances. What followed was not a film sequence. It was a truck and a security SUV on a causeway above the Terrebonne marshland at 4 in the morning. Two vehicles making the decisions that vehicles make when neither operator is willing to yield the road. The contractors were competent professionals. So was Frank Callahan, with the difference that Frank had been driving this causeway since 1987, and the contractors had been on it for 14 minutes. The SUV went sideways against the concrete barrier at the causeway's second curve, the sound of it specific and final. Maya was out of the truck before it stopped moving. The contractors exited the vehicle with the readiness of people who had anticipated contact and had a response protocol prepared. She took the first one with a strike that converted his own forward momentum into a liability, the door having swung outward into him as he moved. The second cleared the vehicle on the far side, and she went over the hood in a movement that surprised him because it used geometry he had not included in his assessment of where the threat would come from. The third contractor was the problem. He was the best of the three, and he did not make the recovery errors that the first two had made. And for approximately 4 seconds, the outcome of the engagement was genuinely uncertain. That is a long time for an outcome to be uncertain. Maya knew it was 4 seconds because she counted them. Frank ended the uncertainty at the 4-second mark. He was 64 years old, and he had not been in an operational context in 11 years. He had also been in 43 operational contexts before that, and 43 writes itself into a man's neurology below the level of conscious decision-making. He came around the front of the truck with the economy of movement that is the specific and unreplicable product of a life spent doing difficult and dangerous things correctly, over and over, until correct becomes the only available response. At the 4-second mark, the situation was uncertain. 4 seconds later, it was not. Harlan Strickland was in the back seat. He was 67 years old, and he had the face of a man who has spent an entire career building systems specifically designed to prevent this moment from occurring, who has now discovered the outer boundary of those systems. He was wearing civilian clothes, dark slacks, a fleece jacket, the clothes of a man heading for an early flight. He looked, in the overhead courtesy light of the disabled SUV, entirely like someone's grandfather. Maya opened the door. He looked at her. He was calculating, the way he had been calculating his way through every difficulty for 40 years. It was a short calculation this time. "You have no authority to—" "I have a federal arrest statute, a USB drive containing your authorization signature on a classified leak that resulted in the death of a United States Army captain, and approximately 5 minutes before Louisiana State Police reached this causeway." She held the flex cuff where he could see it. "The question of authority can be addressed in front of a federal judge at whatever time that judge is available. Right now, you're going to step out of the vehicle." He looked at her for another moment. Then he looked past her. Frank was standing at the front of the truck, hands at his sides, watching. He had the look of a man who has waited a very long time for a specific moment and has arrived at it to find that it requires nothing from him. No speech, no confrontation, no expression of the decades of weight he had carried since a morning in Kuwait in March of 1991, when he pulled a trigger on a man who had done nothing wrong. Just his presence, just his witness, just the fact of him standing there in the dark on a Louisiana causeway, 64 years old and still standing, watching the man who had set all of it in motion finally run out of road. Strickland looked at Frank and something moved through his face. Recognition, and beneath the recognition, something older and less composed than anything Harlan Strickland's face had shown in a very long time. "Frank," he said. Frank said nothing. He watched Strickland step out of the vehicle. He watched Maya put the cuffs on. He watched the whole of it with the stillness of a man who has found that the moment he needed does not require him to do anything except be present for it, and that this is enough, and that it has always been enough, and that he should have understood this sooner. The Louisiana State Police arrived at 4:19. The Sun arrived at 6:11. By then, Harlan Strickland was in federal custody at a processing facility outside Baton Rouge. The machinery of jurisdiction and formal accusation having begun its slow and ultimately irreversible work. By then, Leland Doss had been formally charged with espionage and breach of trust aboard a Coast Guard cutter in the Gulf, sitting across a table from two agents who had more questions than the night had hours. By then, Commander Sylvia Vance had submitted a complete written statement to the Naval Inspector General, an uncharacteristically thorough document, its thoroughness being a function of her understanding that the USB drive's contents were already known to multiple parties, and that incomplete disclosure was no longer a viable strategy. She was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. She did not contest the placement. There are moments when the most professionally sound decision available is the one that maintains the appearance of cooperation. Maya was suspended from operational duty 48 hours later. The paperwork cited unauthorized independent action and failure to comply with a direct order from a superior officer. She signed the acknowledgement form without comment. Her JAG attorney reviewed the suspension language and told her privately and without particular emphasis that given the documented contents of the USB drive and the nature of what it established about the order she had declined to follow, the formal review hearing scheduled for 6 weeks out would likely be brief, quiet, and resolved in a manner consistent with the available evidence. The institution moved toward accountability slowly and toward the appearance of accountability with considerably more speed. She did not think about the hearing often. There were other things that required thinking about. By the time the sun was fully up, Maya and Frank were back at the bayou, the same bank, the same water, the same cypress trees receiving the first light of the morning in the same way they had received 10,000 mornings before this one, without comment or preference or any acknowledgement that this morning was different from the others. Frank had his thermos. Maya had her boots off and her feet in the water at the bank's edge, the cold of it clarifying after the long night in the way that cold water is clarifying, not comfortable, but honest. The bayou moved past them the way it always moved, south, carrying what the land gave it, making no distinctions. "I owe you something," Frank said. "You owe me the windage correction. I owe you considerably more than that." He was looking at the water, not at her. "I should have told you about your father years ago. I convinced myself I was protecting you from information you weren't ready to carry. That was not accurate. I was protecting myself from the experience of saying it out loud to the person it mattered most to." He stopped. "I'm sorry, Maya." She was quiet for a moment. On the far bank, something moved through the shallows and was still. "He knew what he was walking into," she said. "When he filed those reports, when he kept pushing after the first one was archived without response, he understood the risk he was taking." "He was a Callahan," Frank said. "He understood exactly what he was walking into. He did it anyway because it was the right thing to do, and he was the kind of man who did the right thing when it was the right thing, regardless of what it cost him personally." He paused. "He always was, even as a boy." She nodded once. Something shifted in her face. Not resolution, not the clean completion that stories provide and actual grief refuses to, but the beginning of the slower process by which an unbearable thing becomes a carried thing. That process takes time. It takes years, but it has to begin somewhere. And it usually begins with a specific moment when the full truth of a thing is finally known and can finally be sat with. Frank reached into the chest pocket of his canvas jacket. He placed something on the driftwood between them carefully, the way you place something that has been kept safe for a long time and deserves to remain safe in its new location. A combat infantryman badge in a small frame, the glass cracked at one corner, the mounting slightly faded. Owen Callahan's, the one Frank had kept since 2009, when the Army had sent personal effects to the next of kin, and the only next of kin available to receive them had been Frank. Maya looked at it. She did not pick it up immediately. "He was better than me," Frank said quietly, "in most of the ways that counted in the long run. Better than me at believing that the institutions deserve the trust he gave them. Better at the kind of hope that keeps doing the right thing through the silence." He looked at the water. "I ran out of that particular kind of hope a long time ago. He never did." She picked up the badge. She held it in both hands and looked at it for a long time without speaking. The way you look at a thing that is simultaneously a loss and a fact and a continuation of something. The sun was fully established now, the bayou lit in gold and green, the cypress trees casting long morning shadows across the water that shortened as the light climbed and would keep shortening until noon, when they would stop and begin the other direction. A kingfisher launched from a low branch directly above them without warning, dropped in a perfectly vertical line toward the surface of the channel with the total commitment of a creature that does not consider the possibility of missing, struck the water without hesitation, and rose again with something silver in its beak. The whole arc completed in less than 2 seconds, the water closing behind it as if the interruption had not occurred. Smooth again, moving south, carrying everything. "Windage," Frank said. His voice was quiet. "Half a click right. We'll work it again tomorrow morning." Maya looked at the water, at the channel moving south, at the light on it and the way the light moved. "Yeah," she said. She held her father's badge, and the bayou ran south in the morning light, and carried everything the way it always had, and would carry it south to the Gulf, and into the open water beyond, patient and indifferent and permanent, the way the truth eventually goes when there is finally nothing left holding it down.